Interview with Jane Marsh, interviewed by Edie Twining.
Hi Jane, thank you for coming. You have a long history on Old Lyme, and we would love to let you just jump in and tell us, about your family and your experiences.
Well, my family has in its list of original progenitors all the Matthew Griswolds, and that's on my father's side. My mother was British, so of course she's imported into the area. Dad used to say this was a good thing because animals, when you breed them, if you cross out of the bloodline, you get what's called hybrid vigor. So that meant that his children had hybrid vigor, and maybe we do and maybe we don't, but and I'm not sure that's actually why he married my mother. For sure, I think he was in love with her and chased her around instead, so whatever. But yes, lots and lots of family members in town. Some that are born here and then leave, some that return here because they know that this is where the family originated. A large number, I'd say I probably know 50 or 60 relatives quite well, communicate with them on a regular basis, see them either in my capacity as a lawyer because they need some help, or at 4th of July, big get-together when everybody gets to see each other, with many new generations that you have no idea who they are, but there are all these children running around. But the family takes some pains, I think, to know itself and to keep people together for one reason or another. Certainly when I was growing up, a lot of time was spent by my father and others to make sure that you knew that you were part of this particular family, and then dressed it up with all the stories necessary to help you really remember that. I live within a half a mile of the Griswold Point, which is the sort of area where they were all originally settling, and it's still intact. It's amazing after so long that it's still a place that is a particular family's place. And where I live is not part of the original, but it's close by, and it was purchased and bought in right around 1900 for that reason, because the woman in the family wanted to return and to be part of the original Griswold Point family, and they had to buy property down the road. So that's where I live. I've lived there pretty much all my life. I had the first 6.5 years on a farm on Mile Creek Road. My father purchased the farm just after college because he had a dream of being a farmer. Nobody in the family thought this was a good idea. He also had a law degree, so that wasn't exactly how he ended up making his money as a farmer, but he just liked the idea of farming. He got that from his great-grandfather in Ohio, where he was born. He acquired the farm. He purchased Jersey cows for the farm, and his first money-making proposition was to sell milk and cream during the war, because it was one of those things that was rationed and difficult. So he had a small bottling facility there and a tank and everything, so he could do that. This was all way before I was born, so I don't know anything of it personally. But that's where I lived, at that farm. We had probably at the highest point 100 Jersey cows.
Really?
They were bred for their quality of Jerseyness, not for making money. He had lots of men who worked at the farm. So my experience as a very young child was to grow up on a farm, right in the middle of it, totally unsupervised. My mother wasn't paying attention. And I have a twin sister, so the two of us, who are 10 years younger than any of our siblings, were loose on the farm. So we spent it in the manure pile and sleeping with the cows and all kinds of fun things like that. And that was not my parents' experience, because my father was a gentleman farmer. He did not scoop any manure or do anything. He was the brains behind this breeding operation. And so that was his motive of having it. He wanted to purify the Jersey breed back to its original characteristics. Its original characteristics are to have high butterfat and high protein. So it's less water and more nutritious contents. And by breeding, etc., in the United States, that had been watered down. So his mission was to improve that, and he did. He actually had a decided effect on it. But for as far as a working farm, it meant lots of men hired to do careful work. He didn't want to hurt any of the cows. When they were milked by hand 3 times a day, because the important thing was to make a record, have lots of statistics about how these cows were doing, and that he sold them and promoted them on that basis. So that was my early life.
Was there some reference to Elsie the Cow that you might?
Yeah, Elsie the Cow. So there was, this is interesting too, he spent money to hire a Pan American jet to transport 25 to 30 animals from the island of Jersey, where all these cows originate, to the United States. And they were in the Pan American jet, and they landed in at Kennedy, and were taken immediately to a facility in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and kept there for 6 months because we can't have hoof and mouth disease in this country, but they do have it in England. And so men took care of these cows for 6 months. And in this bunch was this cow called Itasca's Winter Fairy. They all have names. We all knew their names. And Itasca's Winter Fairy was a beautiful cow, but could not get in calf. So Dad was about to maybe turn this one into hamburger, which is very unfortunate. But a contest came up that said, you enter the face of your cow, and if your cow's face wins, it gets to be Elsie the Cow at the New York World's Fair in New York. And so there were, I understand, 10,000 entries of everybody sticking their cow's face in the contest. And Itasca's Winter Fairy, which had the beautiful dished face, big brown eyes, and all that, won. So she got the prize. And Borden supported the whole thing because this was their Elsie the Cow for Borden's. It was my one moment of celebrity status because we got to go down to Macy's. There was a press conference to introduce Elsie to the world. And my mother and father took my sister and I down. We had to be dressed up. We were in silk dresses, I'll have you know, that my mother had made. I don't think they were for that occasion. I think they were leftover bridesmaid dresses or something. But anyway, we were all doozied up, patent leather shoes and everything. Very uncomfortable. Going down in the car, we were coached about what we were not allowed to say, because both my sister and I say whatever pops into our heads, and very loquacious, as you will find out. So when we got there, Dad had a clipboard with all the production records of all the family of this cow, and who made how much milk and what prizes had been won and everything else. And my mother was making sure that every hair was in place. And we walked into the room where Elsie the Cow was standing, a big open room. And my sister and I walked in. The press immediately swamped my sister and me, because we're twins, we're identical, and there's a certain charm to that. You can't get over it. And so we went over to where the cow was, and Mom and Dad were pushed way to the rear. So I could see Dad sort of circling around with his clipboard saying, doesn't anybody want to know anything about Elsie's family? Of course, no, they didn't. And my mother was sort of worrying about what we were saying, because nobody could even kick us from behind or anything. And so they wanted us to stand one on one side of her face and one on the other, and they took our picture. And I believe that picture came out on the front of the New York Times newspaper the next day or something like that.
Right.
Moment of celebrity status, because it was all over as soon as that was over. Apparently we didn't say anything super outrageous, but my parents were, palpitating that they'd see something in the newspaper the next day. And then that cow was at the World's Fair the whole time. I think it was a 2-year fair. And then she toured all of the United States for board, and they purchased it from Dad. He was so happy. I think they may have given him $12,000 for a cow, which at that time was lots of money. And then when she actually got very old, they asked Dad whether he wanted her back, and he did. So he took her back, and she continued to live at the farm, along with certain other cows. The ones that won prizes for him did high levels of production, or Elsie got to live until they died a natural death. Not all of them ended up that way. So yes, we had Elsie the Cow as our status symbol for Old Lyme. So that was part of Dad's doing, all of Dad's doing. But anyway, when I was 6½, my great aunt died, and she left her estate solely to my father, which consisted of this home down in the south part of Old Lyme that my mother very much wanted to move to. We were living in a farmhouse. This would have been a definite step up to move into this other house. And I think Dad wanted to move there too. It needed a lot of renovation and painting, because anytime a person who gets very elderly lives somewhere, things happen. So the front beautiful garden was completely knitted together with wisteria that was probably about 2 or 3 inches in diameter. Some trees had it wrapped around them, and it had made deep impressions in the trunks of trees. So I remember a bulldozer being hired basically to bulldoze acres and acres of property around there to get rid of all the wisteria that had just knitted the entire top of that hill together. It's still there. I can't get rid of it completely. I've done lots of things to do that. So the wisteria, which was brought from China by great-grandparents, thinking this was a very good addition, turns out it's the worst nuisance plant you could ever imagine. It is very pretty when it has those little blossoms and all that. So we all moved there. We moved from the farm to down to the shore, and I've lived there ever since. I've never, except for a brief interlude in Chattanooga, Tennessee after college, I've lived at the home property the whole time with my parents as long as they lived. I felt it was my duty to make sure that financially they got over the finish line without ever having to feel that anybody didn't have the resources to do that. So that sort of dictated a lot about life choices for me, that I understood at quite a young age that I needed to have income, and that Dad was more of an outgo kind of person. And he had visions, and he would do his visions, and they would result in good results, but with nothing, no money left over to show for it. So I have performed that function, I think, in my family of keeping the property, all of it together, except for a little bit that Dad sold when he got into debt, but most of it is totally intact. And then more recently, actually having enough money so that I can totally rehabilitate the house itself, which I've done. I was feeling so guilty as a steward of property that I could see that the roof had a leak in it, and the shingles on it were original. They were from 1900. And I defeated 5 different men who thought they could do the roof, looked at it, promised me everything, and were never heard from again. And it took one guy who was completely different, and he was very nice, and he brought people, and they had it done all in 2 weeks. But it was an enormous project, and then it has red cedar shingles on it. And by the way, when they took the roof off, it was perfect underneath.
Wow.
It had asbestos cement on it. And you'd think that would be a horrible thing, but it's not, because the cement holds the asbestos, so it doesn't go anywhere. It's the greatest product ever, because the roof lasted 120 years.
Wow.
And the reason that it started to leak was that some of the nails that were holding those shingles on, it's like slate, it feels like slate, had come out. So the water could get down in there. But it's been hit by lightning. That house went through many, many hurricanes without any issue at all. The 38 hurricane, according to Dad, there was a decorative piece along the top of the home that had a serpent. So it was, or Asian sort of looking. So the body of the serpent went along the top of the house, and then 2 serpent heads came out from either end. And according to Dad, the hurricane rolled it up and vaporized it somewhere. It's probably out in the swamp somewhere if somebody took a thing, but never to be seen again. So that little ornament disappeared. But everything else, nothing else about that property was damaged at all. The big dairy barn at the Finnegan's farm, it's a huge dairy barn, imploded. The air pressure, apparently it was too airtight, and it sucked inwards. So that's gone. The foundation was still there, but when I was growing up.
So was the original owner was also a Griswold, obviously.
Well, Charles
related.
Horace Moss married Elizabeth Griswold. So we have Griswolds, a lot of them, Griswolds female, are disguised by their names, but they are Griswolds. So they were living in Ohio. Charles Horace Moss was getting old. His wife very much wanted to return to Old Lyme because she was from there and still had yearnings. And so I guess when he got really old, she persuaded him to ditch Ohio, as everybody else who had made that journey out there had done, and return to Old Lyme. And so he built this really, really nice house that I live in, and then 2 other houses and all these barns and everything. He went on a spending spree and just built the entire thing from scratch.
And was that a summer place first? Or?
Yep. Yeah, it was built as a summer home, because I think he must have been tentative about whether we would really return. So yes, they used to come for summers, and so did other members of the family come and stay. Seemed it was a normal thing that they just pull up sticks and come and stay here and be with the family. I understand that at some point they also had other people come stay, because I had posted some of the cookies that I paint on my Facebook page. It's the only thing I do on Facebook. I have not entered the Facebook world, but I just post them because I think people will enjoy them. And someone saw the picture of the dining room where I was put them all out on the table, and saw the paintings and the whatever, and I don't know how they recognized it, but they said some older relative of ours came and rented that house in like the 1930s or something. And I said, no, it couldn't be, because I never heard that this house got rented to anybody. But he gave me enough information to say that, oh yeah, that they must have let it out. My great-grandmother was old and infirm, and I imagine that there was some time when maybe she couldn't live at home, but maybe they needed some income to pay for taking care of it, and so they must have invited other families to come and stay there. But that was something I'd never heard from anybody else in the family. So it took the internet to get that little thing coming out. And I'm so surprised that they recognized it. When we moved to the house, the stamp of the man that my great aunt married, Ira Krupp, his name was very heavy on the house. He had a stuffed sailfish over the mantelpiece, like that. Of course, Mom said, out, that can't go, because it had some of the stuffing coming out. But he had some other really interesting things. He had tortoise shell, really big ones, going up the stairs. He had, I'm not sure which fish it is that has a long snout with sort of barbs coming out of it, but he had some of those there. And we thought of them as shields and swords. We thought this was really cool. But it has in it, even now, today, it has a big steamship wheel from one of the steamships that used to go up and down the Long Island Sound. It's beautiful. Apparently, I know all about the boat it came from. I did some research and I've got all the information. There were, on the ship itself, there were 2 steering wheels sunk in halfway to the deck just so you could reach the upper thing. They were not the passenger ones that were all fancy. This was a cargo ship, and it went between New York City and Newport, and it was filling the gap on the railroad. So the shipping had all come in New York City. There wasn't a railroad yet that went from New York City up to Newport, so these boats carried the cargo, and they would go all night. So they were night traveling boats, steam, paddle wheel driven steamships that went up. This one was called the City of Brockton. And apparently this great uncle of mine had gone to the salvage when it was, I think 1937 or something, it was taken apart. And he purchased the wheel, and it sits along the stairway. It's beautiful. It's really a beautiful thing. I've thought about giving it to the steamship for their exhibit, but right now it's still sitting in my house.
So what makes Old Lyme different to you than everything else? Is it mainly the family connection, or is there...
Well, I mean, it's kind of hard to separate myself from Old Lyme.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's just part of me, because I've always been here. You know, I went away to college and things like that. I did have a strong draw. I almost purchased some land in Virginia in the Blue Ridge because it spoke to me. And what spoke to me most was there were these old brick homes that were neglected and abandoned. The families would have taken the trailer and put it in the back because it was warm and cozy, and they could set up their television disc, and that was all they needed. But out front would be this beautiful Civil War orange brick, you know, house, totally abandoned. And I just somehow I wanted one of those, and I was going to fix it up and everything. But I could just tell I couldn't quite get my foot out of the dirt of Old Lyme, and it's partly that filial obligation. I had very, very strong feelings of responsibility for my parents, very close to them. Of all the children, they let me grow up and be an adult, and they relied on me. So that's the kind of thing that you can't get your foot very far out of the ground for that. And so I felt a strong need to return. And I'm the youngest, because isn't that the job of the youngest? I'm 20 minutes younger than my twin. She did take off and did all kinds of things. If you ever interview her, she's had a very interesting life. So I allowed my feelings of responsibility to my parents and this property, and I guess the family name, to hold me firmly in place. And I've thought about it. I'm not unhappy about having done that at all. I say is there's a weave to my life. So this way, which is all the people I live with, you know, I fit in with them nicely and do all kinds of things that are good. But I also have the other direction, which is I'm part of this family, and I am not going to spoil the family tree. And so, because I've read about those who have, you know, and so I'm also held in place by that feeling that I'm from somewhere, that I have a lineage that it might have a few roads and boundaries in it, but there's a value to being able to keep that in good shape. And so it just holds you gently. It doesn't feel like a burden. And even, you know, taking care of the property has never felt like a burden. I mean, I'm the one that rides the tractor and mows the lawn and knows how to, I wrote that in there, I know how to use a chainsaw. I'm not afraid of a chainsaw at all. Or taking apart my tractor to put it back together again to fix it. I find it fun.
Yeah.
And that happened too because it wouldn't be traditional for me to do that, but as Dad was pursuing his passion of improving the Jersey breed and the money in the family kind of went like this, the ability to hire somebody to do it was eliminated. And since I was the child at home and liked being outside, somehow just by mistake I became the land person. And so I had a little push mower first, an unpowered push mower. The kind that goes chee. That was how I started out. Then I moved to the first, pull one, thought I'd gone to heaven. And I can remember very specifically when I bought the first rider lawnmower. And I said, how could I have lived without having my first rider lawnmower? By the third rider lawnmower, I had a John Deere rider mower. It was still only about 36 inches. At that time, it took me 14 hours to mow the lawn. So pretty much every weekend during the summer, I was on the lawnmower from dawn to dusk and doing various things around the property. That lawnmower, after I'd owned it for probably 6 or 7 years, I realized it had a little counter on it. And I looked at the counter of number of hours, divided it by 24 to get the number of days, and then divided that by 365, I had been on the lawnmower for 3 solid years. And it's sort of like with a blast that went off, I have to get a bigger mower. So I went and got one that is 72 inches, a big diesel thing. And you know, the bigger equipment you have, the more you have to learn how to hear when it's not working right and learn how to fix it. So that's been another thing in my life, is that it just, because I was by myself, nobody else, that's what I learned how to do, and I'm very comfortable in my mechanical aspect of doing those things. And of course I had to learn how to use the chainsaw. So instead of being taught by anybody, this woman had the manual and read it from cover to cover. I have had in my lifetime some very gentle men who have taken the trouble, because they're so thrilled that I am who I am, to teach me things. There was a man named Lou Secchi who ran the John Deere place in Old Saybrook, who definitely took me under his wing. He was so delighted when I'd come in there and ask him a question about anything. And he taught me a lot, and he's still alive. He's totally infirm, unfortunately, but he taught me all kinds of things. And so now I have a major size tractor with a bucket on the front, which I can run and operate and plow my own driveway and help others who can't plow the driveway. And I have a big Z-turn commercial 72-inch thing and another one. So I have 2 giant lawnmowers. My husband will get on that. My husband won't ride on the tractor. So we have more and more equipment. This is what men learn in their lives, that you have to keep getting more equipment to leverage what you can do. So me, being this little peanut in the middle, knows how to run all the levers. It doesn't matter whether I'm strong or weak. I can, whatever you put me in. And I've done so many dangerous things in that equipment. Lucky I'm alive. I'm going to say lucky I'm alive, because that's what happens when you use some of that stuff. So that's how I ended up with that little feature about me.
Well, you're a really very busy person. I know you also have been on the zoning commission for 40 plus years, which is another.
So that was Dad again, instilling in me that you aren't a full person unless you serve your community. And he did. He was on the, I think he was on the zoning commission. I know he was on the Board of Finance. I used to tag along when he was on the Board of Finance, so I had an idea of what it meant to be home rule and all that. So when the instant I became a lawyer, I don't know who sniffed me out, but said, all right, you have to be on something. So I went on the Planning Commission at the time with Barbara Dietrich and learned a huge amount. Probably within a year, I was also on the Regional Planning Commission. And so I served on those, and I switched from planning to zoning, because the Planning Commission was frustrated that the Zoning Commission wasn't doing certain things. And so they thought they needed a new surrogate placed, not a spy, but a person on there to get them onto the right track. So I moved, and I've been there ever since.
So have you seen changes in the way things get done in town, or?
Well, how I see it is that people come and go a lot in Old Lyme. And that therefore their historical knowledge of why something was done, why does that regulation exist, why is it important, what will happen if you say yes instead of no. That's what you get after being on a commission for a long time. You see the importance of it and why, and they don't if they don't stay long enough. I remember my first couple of years, especially on the Regional Planning Agency, they spoke in language I did not understand. It was all these acronyms for all these federal programs, and they were strung together with ands and these in a sentence, and I had no idea what they were talking about. But, if you have the patience to remain and think it's your responsibility to remain, eventually you get the understanding of what it is. So what I've seen is that there are waves where, either for politics reasons or something else, there'll be a bunch of new people that will show up and either have a personal interest because they were next to a subdivision and didn't like it, or the opposite, that they think there should be more economic development in town, and why isn't there any? There's too many people around here that say no all the time. So they'll get on the commissions, and they come in there like bulls in china shop, just like the new person at the town meeting. You can tell somebody new at a town meeting because they're standing up and they're making a big wave over something. So the same things happen in local commissions, is that they're so new and they can't understand why. So they'll say things at meetings, and they'll be very sort of new ideas, but sometimes they'll be toned down. So the idea that you sometimes want some of your opponents to join you on the table is very true, because half the reason they're your opponents is they don't understand. They don't understand sort of the longer view, or why you might say no or yes in certain circumstances. But once they're there for a while, they begin to get that knowledge, and then they become a useful member of community because they have that knowledge. Because this is all by lay people. I mean, yes, I'm a lawyer, but I didn't get special training in land use in law school. But I have had it now for this 40 years on the boards and land use boards and commissions. So it's a little hard for me to get off. And on occasion, I think I should get off, because I shouldn't sit in the way of the next person that needs this kind of training. But on the other hand, I've been the continuity person. And I'd say, there's no other commission member that I'm sitting with now that has the same longevity. Some do, though. They're quite loyal. It takes those loyal type people to continue the work. Our regulations are very thick, as you've encountered. There's a lot in there to know. We change zoning enforcement officers fairly frequently because they move on in their lives. So it is important that the commission members have some depth to them as to why they're there and what they're up to. Because there's just a whole lot of things going on, and the land use commissions do describe what the place looks like in such a fundamental way. So people who move here and love the way it looks, that's how it happens. Why it looks that way. Because the pressure for development, we are equally distant between Boston and New York. And we're at the mouth of the Connecticut River. We have everything that anybody would ever want, and except maybe a job, I don't know. But so it's a high demand place. And whenever something's in high demand, if there isn't someone or some organization to say, well, we're going to go make sure we preserve at least the thing that you looked at and saw and liked it, why you liked it here. And it can seem kind of crude sometimes, because it's not that we're here now and we don't want you to come. I don't feel that way, actually. I do have to feel that I want to represent the modern people's view of what should happen. I don't want to become an old crustacean that just, not like it used to be. I do want to respond to the way people think and what they desire too, because that's who's living here. The majority are now younger than I am sure. But you still have to know which ones are they actually needing you to preserve. So it's very much like having a house, like my house. You may not see the generation that is actually going to want it. And if you sell it, you don't have it anymore. But if you are patient and you preserve it, that gives time and all of the things that have to come into fruition to find that person who wants it. And it has happened with the Finnegan Farm. I'm about to transition that property to Jeffrey Marsh, my nephew, who is now the CEO of Wayland Engineering. He's been advancing all these years, so now he's at the top. And he's decided that he wants to take care of that property. So I don't have to do it anymore. So that one's going to be handed over to him, and he has all these ideas about what he'd like to do, and he has daughters. And so I think, we're about to having a meeting with each other so that can happen. Now, if I decided 20 years ago that it had to go, there wasn't enough time for Jeffrey to get to where he needed to be. So it just seems that's how it works in zoning too, and land use is it.
Well, and I'm sure you've seen the change from when Lime Street was the core of the town to when it became more car-centric on Knowles Road and...
Well, certainly, I was at least aware, 1960, I think, was when we made this big switch. And that was Matthew Griswold the Ninth that spearheaded that whole thing. And preserved all of Lime Street as a relic almost. And those, I was just speaking about this at a meeting the other night, that because we were discussing an overlay zone to, basically it's for charitable institutions to be able to broaden what they do and support themselves. But all of Lime Street has labored under being non-conforming except for residences. And there's a lot of the vestiges of the original Lime Street on Lime Street. And I'm not sure that we've had appropriate sympathies for those people. We've certainly preserved it. If you look at it, it has not been corrupted. But there have been owners, and many of them, who've owned the properties and then realized that they're very confined. You know, the idea that you have to go get a variance and show a hardship means that's not hardship financial, it's hardship of some other kind, means that they have been circumscribed a great deal in what they can do. And there have been changes. Certainly the whole College of Fine Arts that now exists at the end of the Lime Street didn't exist. And all those apartment buildings that were going to be the dormitories didn't exist. A lot of school expansion didn't exist. Town Hall got completely renovated and expanded. And certain of the businesses changed what they were doing, but others just melded into the background. But you can see that zoning by that method of just declaring everything non-conforming and presuming that it will then conform, so that all those businesses were supposed to become residences, I don't think any of them became residences. Maybe one or two. I think the old AMP on the main road, so I'm old enough to remember that the AMP was across from the library. And I can remember going into it and stepping down. Do you remember it, Edie?
I know the building, I don't remember, I remember Spencer's better, but...
Yeah, well, Spencer's was much more modern, but the original AMP was one of those buildings right across from the library. And so I've got to be like 3 or 4 to have this kind of a memory of going in there, and probably my mother says, now be careful, don't fall, because you have to step into it and down into this building, and it was very small. That was the whole AMP for the whole place. So moving it out and into where it is now on Halls Road allowed us to have a real shopping center with a real grocery store and everything else for all the people that were here, instead of everybody go to Saybrook. I still go to Saybrook. I don't shop at Big Y. I don't know. But anyway, that's, yes, there's been a lot of changes. And these are ongoing sort of policy and philosophical issues for me as a member of the Zoning Commission to see the vision, and I can know what you're doing and various other people. So it's how to be respectful of the modern people who live here, who are much more suburban. I've been through phases of who I live with. The Grange, this building we sat in, was an active Grange. And that meant there was a solid farming community in Old Lyme in my young years. And Dad was part of it, and Mom was part of it. So it was a central community organization then. It isn't now, and it isn't in pretty much all of Connecticut, it isn't, but it's because rural has disappeared to be replaced by suburban. We're still rural/suburban. We're classified as a metropolitan district for planning purposes. I don't know whether you know that or not.
No, I did not.
We are a city, because they just consider us one big city,
Wow.
The former director of the Regional Planning Agency, Linda Krause, made a huge contribution to our town and to our area by making sure that the state was aware that you need the spaces between the places. That was her coinage. And that if you think every place needs to be the same, then you're wrong, because humans don't like that. And she was very articulate and really did a good job at the state level and at the regional level. But she did our area such a good turn by that, because that meant that Quirpa was allowed to stay undeveloped and to have its, maybe it's apartheid or whatever, you can maybe give bad names to it, but it was allowed. And again, it might be through this period of adjustment, where if you don't see it and then make everything the same, then you've lost something, and when finally you've realized that, oh, we shouldn't have done that, it's too late. So I would say, of all people, she did that, because she trained us to think that way, and all the other 9 towns that were part of that region at the time. The region in that way doesn't exist anymore. It's now 17 towns. I stopped being on that commission once it did that, because initially it said everybody had to be members of the planning commission that got on that, and I wasn't at that time. I'd moved to zoning. Then they were willing to make a special change in the law just for me, but it had been a year since I was on it, and I could tell I was really not as enthusiastic to being on a 17-town thing. It was kind of disorganized, and so I bowed out. That was how I got bowed out of that job. But anyway, this is about Old Lyme and how I think it changes. It's continuing to change, and again, I know that there are younger people with the same vision, that they may not have honed it to the degree that I have just by age, but I hope they're there and waiting for me to get unelected, so that I could keep the chair warm for them.
Well, I think this has been really a wonderful interview. Great to hear your sides of things and what your experiences have been in Old Lyme. And we certainly are very lucky to have you here. So.
Well, I think we're lucky to have you here, too. Both in your historical capacity and in every other way, too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming.
And, you're welcome. I was happy to do it.